Welcome, wrestling fans, to the Pro Wrestle Machine. Whether you're tuning in from the Great American Bash or halfway around the world, we've got a jam-packed episode for you. Get ready to dive into wrestling's rich history, packed with insights, opinions, and a few surprises. And remember, you can skip to your favorite moments with our chapter markers. Let's jump right into it. August 21, 2000 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. Steve Austin to return, WCW Thunder canceled. More. By Dave Meltzer. Steve Austin this past week received medical clearance from Dr. Lloyd Youngblood to return to active wrestling in 8 weeks, most likely at the October pay-per-view. Austin, who had been on the sidelines since November and had neck surgery in January that put his career in jeopardy, got what was regarded as a cautious okay after exams on his neck on August 10th and on his knees on August 12th. After the neck exam, Youngblood suggested he stay out another 2 months to be on the safe side. The knee exam showed that with his time off, there had been no added deterioration and his legs themselves are the strongest they have been in years because he's been very limited in his ability to do upper body exercises, so in training has concentrated on his legs. It is still not clear what the future holds for Austin, 35, who was the biggest star in the industry at the time he went down, but had been bothered by a myriad of knee and neck problems at the same time his career was skyrocketing, stemming back to his football days and suffering stenosis of the spine, which was accentuated by a 1997 injury in a match with Owen Hart, and continuing to perform against the wishes of several doctors who examined him after that injury. Youngblood reported that Austin is healing very well and the bone fusion is strong, and would likely give him the okay to return to the ring after a subsequent exam at the end of September. It is doubtful Austin will ever return to a full-time schedule, but they are hoping for a short-term storyline which would give his career a major send-off to lead him into a potential acting career. It has been discussed for Austin to return to television on September 25th, which would be the date that Raw debuts on TNN, although that is far from a definite. As far as returning as a television character, he could return at any time, but it really wouldn't make sense given how strong business is, to put him back on television until he's ready to build for a major angle. The TNN debut has 2 good arguments to be his start. The first, obviously, is to get the new station and viewing habits made from the debut show by heavily advertising Austin's return so people see it as a can't-miss show, and the viewing patterns of finding the new station to most WWF fans to watch on Monday night with casual fans get established right away. The second is because, as the timing seems to work out, the October pay-per-view looks to be when he'll have his first in-ring match. The scenario WWF officials at this point are hoping is that Austin would be appearing, once he starts, at all the TVs, wrestling on occasion, wrestle on PPVs, and maybe wrestle on a few major house shows as well. The time frame of how long this would go on would depend on how well Austin can perform and how well his body can hold up. Austin has said he doesn't want to hang on and be like Hulk Hogan, living off a name. Then again, you can count on probably 0 fingers the numbers of wrestlers who have simply walked away from the profession and not looked back while still huge drawing cards even if they were past their physical primes. The hope is for Austin to at least stay active through a WrestleMania storyline, which will be at the Astrodome in Houston, and perhaps a little longer if he physically is able to perform at the level he wishes to. Austin has offers on the table for starring roles in 2 different television series and 1 major movie. In a huge surprise, News Corporation, run by Rupert Murdoch, which includes the Fox network, outbid Viacom to purchase BHC Entertainment, including Chris Kraft, in a $5.35 billion stock and cash deal that, according to many media experts over the weekend, will likely spell the end of the UPN network and affect its top show, WWF SmackDown, in some form. According to a Los Angeles Times report on August 13th, Viacom walked away from the bidding 2 days earlier when News Corporation offered to buy out Chris Kraft shares at $85, topping the Viacom bid of $83. Herbert Siegel, who owns BHC, had been holding out for $100 per share, but was also not eager to sell to Viacom because of the lawsuit between the 2 parties earlier this year, which forced Chris Kraft to sell its 50% interest in UPN for only $5 million after the company had already lost $400 million in funding the network losses. The 10 television stations purchased would include UPN affiliates in New York, WWOR, Los Angeles, KCOP, and San Francisco, KBHK, thus crippling the network in 3 of the 5 most important media markets. UPN has contracts with the 3 stations that all expire on Jan. 15th, at which time, barring a deal being cut between News Corporation and Viacom to save the network, it is expected the contracts wouldn't be renewed, and it would gravely affect the network. There are even rumors that UPN won't even start its new season in September once the news came out because of the feeling the network is doomed and there is no shot at short-term profitability this year. However, the fall season is in production and Viacom owns Star Trek, Voyager and Moesha, which are believed to have big value later on in syndication. UPN was on track to lose $150 million this season and was set to undergo a name change to the Paramount Network in January. If the company fails to get stations in any of these top markets or gets weaker stations, that figure would likely increase greatly due to weakening ad revenue. Viacom owner Mel Karmazin had already stated to company stockholders that if the network couldn't turn a profit this season, that it would be shut down, and the odds were strongly against it being profitable even before losing its prime outlets, since having no affiliate in any of the top 5 markets, let alone 3 of the 5, dooms the network. There is even feeling that part of the reason News Corporation outbid Viacom for the stations, besides how rare it is that prime stations in major markets become available all at the same time, is because it would kill UPN, which because of SmackDown last season, for the first time became a threat to Fox as the dominant network among young males. A shutdown of UPN would affect SmackDown, although due to the show's strong numbers it would theoretically be easily able to find a home somewhere within the huge Viacom empire. But unless CBS takes the show, it would lose the prestige, as well as the lightning rod that is attached to the show by it, and the WWF itself, being weekly on a broadcast network. However, without a change in January, that network tag may be misleading. Currently UPN is available in about 87.7 million homes, which puts it ahead of the top cable stations from TBS, TNT, CNN, Nick, USA and even TNN, which range from 77 to 79 million homes. However, in January, that number with a loss of just New York, San Francisco and Los Angeles would be down to 64 million, which would cut a huge chunk out of the SmackDown audience and the perception of the show as a national hit, far greater than the 26% drop the loss of the homes would indicate, since New York and Los Angeles draw far higher ratings for SmackDown than the national average. Because of SmackDown's popularity, if it were to remain on UPN and UPN wouldn't have an affiliate in those markets, it would easily find a home due to its ratings power, but not necessarily in prime time or on Thursday. The first sign of major cutbacks in WCW were evident this past week, first with a toned-down Thunder and later with the announcement that starting in late October, all Thunder tapings are cancelled. In an announcement made by Brad Siegel to the wrestlers before the New Blood Rising pay-per-view, starting on October 23 in Little Rock, Arkansas, WCW will cut down to 1 television tapings per week to save costs. There have been 2 scenarios laid out. They could start 1 hour before Nitro goes on the air, tape an hour for Thunder, and then tape the final hour of Thunder after Nitro goes off the air live. The more likely scenario is for Thunder to be taped in its entirety after Nitro ends. While not official, it is also the most likely scenario that Worldwide would become a package show with no first-run matches. If they could tape Thunder on Monday nights without commercial breaks, they could get the show done in around 90 minutes, meaning on East Coast shows, they could still end the card before 11 p.m. This step backwards has a lot of negatives, but saves production costs greatly as well as building expenses since recent Thunder tapings had drawn poorly and advances for future tapings have poor. It will be far more difficult to get good crowd reactions to a secondary Thunder show after Nitro Live is off the air. WCW has done tapings of this manner in the past when it was taping 2 Thunder shows every other week. The end result were hordes of fans leaving during the second show, which led to a dead atmosphere with the noticeable empty seats on camera. The best way to avoid this is to advertise a hot dark match and run it after Thunder ends, similar to what WWF used to do in the 80s during the era of 4+ hour marathon TV tapings. However, WCW doesn't have a Hulk Hogan level star that fans would stay to see, and in those days, they usually kept Hogan away from the fans until his appearance in the dark match. To duplicate this, they'd have to save one big star and not put him live on either Nitro or Thunder. It becomes a lot more difficult when fans have been conditioned that the matches themselves don't mean anything and they've already seen the stars during the Nitro taping. Still, it's probably a necessary decision. Little Rock is the first show after the Australia tour. With Tuesdays cancelled, it leaves WCW just running 5 shows per month, a pay-per-view one Sunday and the weekly television tapings, since the decision had already been made to cancel all house shows after the ones already on the books are completed, with the exception of those sold to foreign promoters. There is talk of adding a few house show dates per month toward the end of the year, but a lot at that point is dependent upon how the company's economic fortunes are going. There was limited pyro at the August 8th Thunder tapings. At the August 13th pay-per-view, cutbacks were noticeable with only 1 big screen instead of the usual 3, A lack of opening show production to separate it from the typical Nitro and Thunder Open, and far less elaborate ring entrances. At this point, none of the big-name wrestlers have either been dropped from contract nor have any attempts to renegotiate major contracts begun. Negotiations have continued and are said to be very serious for ECW to appear in a late-night time slot on the USA Network with a 2-hour show that would combine elements of the popular MTV show Real World with pro wrestling. Negotiations aren't completed but are said to be serious, and ECW is also expected, if getting the slot, to produce more than 6 pay-per-view shows in 2001. The idea of putting together a cross between the two shows is not unique, as the Southern California-based Ultimate Pro Wrestling has had an idea in the planning stages for a similar show in syndication, with its recent Discovery Channel special acting as something of a pilot. At one point the idea for the show was for it to air during the Saturday 6 to 8 p.m. time slot, which was during the late 70s through the early 90s, more often than not, the highest rated time slot for pro wrestling with the traditional TBS show, which was just recently cancelled. The show delivered up and down ratings throughout its run. At one point wrestling in that slot was the highest rated show on basic cable. While the ratings declined throughout the 90s, even as late as the early part of 1998, the show at one point drew a 2.8 rating, although it was hovering between a 1.3 and a 1.5 consistently due to the decline of the WCW product before the plug was finally pulled this summer. However, there were officials at USA Network that were squeamish about the content of an ECW show airing that early, so it was felt a late night time slot would work best for all concerned. Bunham Murray Productions, headed by Jonathan Murray and Mary Ellis Bunham, who are the producers of Real World, are expected to handle production of the show, which is said to be giving a reality base to the backstories while continuing the same style of wrestling ECW is already known for. Kensuke Sasaki added his second G1 tournament victory to go along with his IWGP Heavyweight title reign, winning the most lackluster tournament in history, beating Manabu Nakanishi via submission with a Boston Crab in 1942 on August 13 at Tokyo Sumo Hall before a sellout 11,500 fans. The tournament was a huge disappointment at the gate, only legitimately selling out 2 of the 6 shows, the third night in Hiroshima, which had never had a G1 tournament show in history, and the finals at Sumo Hall. The first of the 3 nights at Sumo Hall drew only 8,500 fans, which was not only the smallest crowd ever at Sumo Hall for the G1, but the smallest Sumo Hall wrestling crowd in many years. The biggest news of the tournament actually took place on the August 11th show, when All Japan's Masa Fuchi showed up. Fuchi got into the New Japan ring and basically said that large doors that have been closed for 30 years, between All Japan and New Japan, are about to open, and called out Riki Choshu, who shook Fuchi's hand. At that point for the angle, Masahiro Chono came out and told Fuchi to leave and that he wasn't wanted. This was apparently an angle to likely build to some interpromotional matches both on the September 2nd All Japan card at Budokan Hall and the October 9th New Japan pay-per-view show at the Tokyo Dome called Do Judge. The lackluster crowds have caused New Japan to rethink the tournament, and Tatsumi Fujinami said they would look to bring in more foreigners next year and go back to the successful World League roots. This year the only foreign competitor was Brian Johnston due to the fact the top 2 foreigners for the group, Don Fry and Scott Norton, are both out with injuries. Past G1 tournaments have been huge successes without any foreign wrestlers involved, but New Japan has lost many of its top stars due to injuries and angles, in particular Shinya Hashimoto, Keiji Muto, and even Kazuo Yamazaki and Riki Choshu, without really getting any newcomers over as drawing cards. Last year's tournament was booked tremendously to create Nakanishi as a new superstar, and would have worked, except Nakanishi was so limited. It did ultimately help because fans do take Nakanishi seriously as a top guy, but he still lacks the charismatic drawing power of those who have left. Putting Sasaki, who holds the IWGP title, over, is a break from the usual formula. While New Japan has put the IWGP champ over once in the past, as a way to give the title credibility as being symbolic of the true best wrestler in the company, the usual most effective role for G1 is to create a strong challenger to beat the champion during the tournament, which has been done most years, most successfully in 1996 when Choshu put himself over in G1 for the first time, which built to a Tokyo Dome sellout when he challenged Hashimoto, who he had beaten in a tremendous match early in the tournament, for the title. Even last year, Nakanishi's win over Muto, the IWGP champ at the time, set up a title match for later in the year where the fans did take Nakanishi seriously as a contender, something they had never done in the past. Muto, in 1995, as champ, won the G1, which turned out in the long run to be brilliant booking because it set Muto up as a real world champion for the lucrative Nobuhiko Tada interpromotional feud. Sasaki's first G1 win, in 1997, set up his first world title win over Hashimoto just a few weeks later in what ultimately has not been a successful attempt for Choshu to get his protege over as a star of the level of Muto, Chono, and Hashimoto. This apparently is another attempt, perhaps, if due to injuries to Chono and Muto and Hashimoto not being there, to get Sasaki over as the ace of the promotion for a feud with someone like a Toshiaki Kawada, in which case it would make sense booking-wise. If not, they missed an opportunity to elevate Yuji Nagata, who is the best worker of the top guys in the company, into a serious world title contender with this tournament. The round-robin tournament after 5 days saw Takashi Iizuka and Nagata, with 3-1 records, tie in the A block. On August 12, Tatsutoshi Goto pinned Nagata and Iizuka used the choke sleeper on Tatsumi Fujinami in a pair of upsets. Fujinami ended up 2-2, Goto 1-3, and Jushin Liger also finished 1-3. In the B block, Sasaki finished with a 3-0-1 record, with the only blemish the double countout with Hiro Saito, whose gimmick it was to draw double countouts in every match because he claimed he wasn't trying to win any matches, but keep his opponent from getting any points off him. Satoshi Kojima was 2-1-1, Brian Johnston was 2-2, Saito was 0-1-3, and Osamu Kido was 0-4. In the C block, Nakanishi and Hiroyoshi Tenzan tied with 3-1 records. Tadao Yasuda was 2-2, Osamu Nishimura was 2-2, and Kenzo Suzuki was 0-4. Nakanishi beat Yasuda on August 12 using the rack, and afterwards, Tenzan, who would have gone outright into the finals with a win, lost to Nishimura's Cobra Twist submission. In the D block, Masahiro Chono won outright with a 3-1 record since Tatsuhito Takaiwa upset Shiro Koshinaka on August 12, so Koshinaka ended up 2-2, as did Junji Hirata and Yutaka Yoshi. Takaiwa was 1-3. This led to playoff matches on August 13 before the semifinals, with Nagata beating Iizuka in 10:48 with the Nagata lock and Nakanishi over Tenzan in 11:26 with the torture rack. Sasaki pinned Nagata in 15:12 with a Northern Lights bomb, while Nakanishi beat Chono via submission with the rack in 9:33 to set up the final match. The final was said to have been a good match and very similar to Sasaki's IWGP title defense earlier this year with Nakanishi. Although the tournament was said to have been lackluster, the final night was reported as a good show with most of the matches having solid heat. Another highlight of the show was that 7 members of the Japanese Olympic wrestling team were introduced in the ring and given money for expenses by New Japan. As expected, the biggest pop was for Katsuhiko Nagata, the younger brother of Yuji. The Iizuka vs. Nagata match on August 9 in Hiroshima was voted best match of the tournament, and Iizuka also got the Fighting Spirit Award for hardest worker of the tournament. The WCW New Blood Rising pay-per-view show from the Pacific Coliseum in Vancouver, BC can best be summed up in 2 words: overbooked crap. Aside from a good first and last match, it was a combination of either bad matches, or guys who should have had great matches. Mike Awesome vs. Lance Storm in particular, given a script that, for a number of reasons, killed their match. There's nothing worse than trying to do comedy when nobody is laughing. Even the main event, after a crowd largely killed by undercard excesses, was hurt by 3 referee bumps. Granted, most of the scenarios have been done in some form on WWF shows, and buy rates seem to indicate that since they've been done, far less fans are more satisfied with the WWF PPVs as well, but one can argue the WWF did grow during that period. But one thing WCW has never gotten a grasp of is that the 2 companies have 2 entirely different audiences. Also, how many movies and television shows use basically a similar formula script? For a dated reference to make this point, there was a classic TV show in the 70s called The Odd Couple, which was a movie remake. The actors in the lead roles were considered 2 of the great comedic actors of their time. Decades later, the show was reprised with new actors, but different directors, producers, and in some episodes, they used word for word the exact same script of classic episodes of the original. But the remake was terrible, and not because the actors were terrible, although they were nowhere near as good as the originals, but because the people running the show didn't know how to execute the little nuances that make word for word, or spot for spot the same thing be the difference between good drama, or good comedy, and bad drama and bad comedy. When Nitro debuted in 1995, it was not so much Nitro willing away Raw's audience, although some of that happened, but more Nitro creating its own audience, largely older and more wrestling as sport-oriented, which is why Nitro's ratings used to be hurt more by major sporting events and competition because it was more of a sports audience. That audience has been run off over the past 2+ years of bad products, so they only have remnants of an audience, Basically the difference between drawing 30,000 in the worst weather possible in St. Louis that pop reverently at the name Sam Mushnick and going back and drawing 4,000 people in perfect weather in the same building who don't even react to the name when trying to use it to garner heat. From crowd reactions, whatever it was they were trying to sell, it wasn't what the fans in Vancouver, which should have been hot all night given WCW has never run the market and it's traditionally a strong city for crowd reactions, were buying. The day after the show I received a letter from Jason Olson of Irvine, California, who made a tremendous point that the people in charge at WCW need to step out of their roles for a night and go to an average family's home and shut up and watch a pay-per-view and see how the person who spent $30 as a fan reacts from the couch. I had a full house over, and they enjoyed the ladder match and started going in the backyard and not caring after that. The only time anyone came in for more than a quick few seconds were two guys who watched the Major Guns match, one of whom only lasted for about half the match and the other of whom loved it until the finish, and then ended up hating it because of the angle. One person also watched the entire Booker T match. The much-hyped three-way with all the shoot references. Nobody gave it more than a quick glance and went in the backyard taking pity on me for having to take notes on something so uninteresting. These were people every single one of whom is a fan to some casual degree. None would be serious fans. Every one of whom loved Nitro during the summer of 1997, have been to numerous live events in the Bay Area, some going back decades but still are at best casual fans, and still know the Raw storylines. The same basic group that was glued to the set during WCW pay-per-view events of that period, and who theoretically, out of curiosity, came over specifically to watch the show and are the same type of people who responded the way the masses did in the last WCW marketing survey. As further evidence that the television hyping this pay-per-view wasn't very effective, after the very strong first weekend of sales, before there was any TV hype for this card and before one match was announced, those in the promotions were talking of a possibility of 10,000 paid and a full house with some papering. Once the lineup was made clear and the hype began on television, nobody bought tickets and it stalled at 5,307, sold for $190,228 Canadian, with a total of 6,614 in the building. Merchandise was another $25,801.20 in Canadian dollars, which works out to $16,771 US, or a paltry $3.16 per head on their first foray into a new market. That was embarrassing also because 56% of the people who got free tickets didn't even show up for the event, which is an incredibly bad figure for a major pay-per-view event, particularly in a market the company has never run. On the bright side, the first match was hot. The main event was well worked. And Conan's commentary in the four-way was entertaining for a few minutes, until it became clear that by talking straight, it was burying the product because of the quality of the match, and when his commentary took a 180 and he began gushing over an awful match, it came off like a Latino Tony Schiavone. 1. 3 count, Shane Helms and Shannon Moore and Evan Kavajias beat Young Dragons, Young Yang and Kaz Hayashi and Jamie Howard, in a double ladder match in 11:32, which would end when one team got both the gold record and the contract being hung. You could tell the guys worked hard on this match as there were a lot of innovative spots and the crowd enjoyed the match. Karagias was announced at being 65% because of his dislocated ankle, which was true, and he seemed to have hurt it worse as the match went on. Lots of great spots, including a Stereo Road Warriors double impact by a member of both teams. Jamie did a plancha off the ladder to the floor. Moore did a neckbreaker off the ladder on Yang, and Helms did a different version of a neckbreaker onto Jamie San, also off the ladder. Karagias superplexed Hayashi off the ladder. Moore did a plancha into a teeter-totter spot, taking out Jamie San. They did a double splash spot off the ladder on Moore. Jamie San got the gold record, but the ladder was drop-kicked and he dropped the record, and Tank Abbott, at ringside, caught it. Jamie San did a leg drop while Karagias was sandwiched by the ladder. Jamie San power-bombed Moore off the ladder. With both teams climbing, Abbott knocked over both ladders, teasing a turn on 3 count. Karagias finally got the contract, but when he gave it to Abbott, Abbott left on his own while Karagias was in the ring holding his ankle. 3 stars. 2. Cat, Ernest Miller, pinned Great Muta, Keiji Muto, in 6:47. Miller got a nice reaction. Before the match, the FAs made a deal with Cat that they would guarantee him a win over Muta if they would get a tag title shot at Nitro. Muta did some good mat work early. Like that mattered. Tigress came out. After Muta blew mist, Tigress came off the top rope with a terrible-looking chair shot. Too bad nobody in WCW management has been around long enough to remember how well Glow did when it tried to tour and how many seasons it lasted before going belly up. Muta kicked out from that, but Cat kicked him in the face for the pin. 1 star. 3. Buff Bagwell, Marcus Bagwell pinned Chris Cluseritis, in 6:45. It was billed as Judy Bagwell on a pole, but actually Bagwell was tied up to a forklift and raised. They turned Canyon's mic off again, but by this point it's obvious that, like the veto tables, are a rib. They brawled in the stands. Canyon did a leg sweep off the middle ropes. He undid the turnbuckle pads, teasing if Bagwell went into them, because of his neck problems, it could wind up with him in a wheelchair for life. Canyon hit the diamond cutter, but Bagwell kicked out. DDP's music played, but instead of DDP, it was David Arquette, with Mark Madden screaming out him being one of the great world heavyweight champions of all time. If that angle had worked and people wanted the world title to be comedy, that's one thing, but since it flopped so miserably, all it does is bury the title and the company bringing up such stupidity. Arquette, who was in Vancouver filming a movie, came out with a construction helmet, which may or may not have something to do with Canyon's first WCW mini-push being part of a construction workers tag team called Men at Work Quick. Name his partner Mark Starr. Arquette hit Bagwell with the helmet for a near fall. Bagwell came back with a blockbuster on both men and pinned Canyon. After the match, Canyon gave Arquette a diamond cutter. Probably the third best match on the show, but disappointing given the participants. 1 3/4 stars. 4. In a total mess, Chronic, Brian Adams and Brian Clark retained the WCW tag titles in a four-way over perfect event. Chuck Palumbo and Sean Steppich, Mark Jindrak and Sean O'Hare and General Rection, William DeMott, and Corporal Cajun Mark LaRue, in 12:22. The filthy animals except Conan, but with Tigress, were all running around the ring with ref shirts on. Mysterio Jr. had devil horns on as well. Disco was in the ring as the main ref and kept counting slow for everyone. The idea was, since the animals were getting the shot, they wanted to fix the match. They kept interfering instead of officiating outside the ring, but again, it was never made clear who they were favoring, so instead of getting heat, this match was confusing the crowd and got the dreaded silence. It was explained the next night on TV that they were favoring O'Hare and Jindrak. Jindrak was so green and four-ways are so much harder to work, so the inexperience in two teams and lack of ability in a third really showed bad. At one point Palumbo missed a kick so bad that Conan, instinctively, went, "What was that?" At that point Conan's commentary changed 180 to putting everyone over as the match got worse. After setting up a high times on Palumbo, Vampiro and Muta came out to make it even more of a mess. Clark hit the meltdown on Palumbo, but Disco wouldn't count. Adams pressed Stasiak overhead and threw him to the floor. Lieutenant Loco then hit the ring and attacked Disco, taking his ref shirt on and putting it around his neck, and he counted as Chronic did the double choke slam on Palumbo. Wouldn't Loco have wanted MIA to win? Dud. 5. Billy Kidman, Peter Gruner, won a strap match over Shane Douglas, Troy Martin, in 8:22. Another bad match with no heat. They didn't use traditional strap match dragging around the corners rules. Douglas used the strap early. Kidman then ripped off Douglas' shirt and began whipping him back. Tori Wilson accidentally hit Douglas with her shoe and Kidman went for a near fall to zero reaction. Except for a brief hot Kidman comeback, there was nothing to this match. When Kidman kicked out of the Pittsburgh plunge, poor Scott Hudson had to shill for saying he didn't think anyone had ever kicked out of that move before. Yeah, except every single time Douglas has used the move since Johnny Ace started laying out matches. Kidman won with the Tomahawks, or Maritado, or whatever they want to call the move, called the Kid Crush. After the match, Kidman whipped Wilson until Douglas jumped him and started hanging him with the strap. Big Vito, who got a nice pop, made the save and ran Douglas off. Reno came out and attacked Vito, and they referenced there must be a story with Vito and Reno, with Vito giving him a high kick and Reno bailed. 1/2 star. In the parking lot, they showed Booker arriving at this point. I guess that's a $500 fine, and Jarrett, apparently wanting to instill discipline in the wrestlers, slammed a car door on Booker's knee several times, thus making Booker injured going into the title match later in the show. 6. Major Guns, Tylene Buck, pinned Miss Hancock, Stacy Keibler in 6:43 in a clothes-tearing mud match. This was terrible wrestling, but it delivered as much if not more than promised, with camera shots up Keibler's butt and Guns' implants being threatened by the size of her top. Way too long. Actually, for the fans who came specifically to see this match, it at least delivered what they came to see from it. Guns had a breast exposed. What was even worse was they went in the gym and tried to work out a match, which was about as bad as two kids on their front lawn. It was too long with no heat until they started tearing clothes. Guns wound up in a typical bikini. Hancock had very short shorts and a more conservative bikini top she was down to. They ended up in the mud. Hancock faked a cramp before getting in the mid.
She collapsed in the mud, apparently doing a miscarriage angle, and was pinned, although the next night they explained it as if she was pregnant, with her tone of the announcement a direct ripoff of Beulah in ECW years ago.
Guns and David Flair freaked out as they stretchered her out to an ambulance. I guess the big swerve here is they'll try and tease that David isn't the father. -2 stars. 7. Sting, Steve Borden, Pin Demon, Dale Torborg in 52 with a Scorpion Death Drop. Sting came from the ceiling. Vampiro and Muta came out and attacked Sting and tried to hang in from his cable. Chronic made the save and challenged them to an impromptu tag title match later in the show. Dud. 8. Lance Storm, Lance Evers, kept the US Canadian title in another mess over Mike Awesome, Mike Alfonso, in a total time of 9:01. These two could have done a normal match and possibly stolen the show, given that the crowd going in was hotter for this match than anything else on the show. Instead, it was booked in a way that the live audience was taken out of it and everyone else was numbed by its stupidity. Storm got by far the biggest face reaction coming out. Jacques Rougeau was announced as guest ref, which disappointed the crowd, which all expected Bret Hart. Rougeau has lost a ton of hair even since the last time he was around. Awesome pulled out a table bringing out loud ECW chants. Even though Awesome worked as the face, the fans booed him heavily. Awesome slipped off the ropes, but made a great recovery with a clothesline. He power bombed Storm. Ref Mark Johnson counted 3 even though Storm kicked out. The bell rang. Rougeau, who was riffing outside, then claimed that Canadian rules state the match can only end with a 5 count. Awesome then trapped Storm in a dragon sleeper and Storm tapped.
Rougeau then stated under Canadian rules that submissions don't count.
Awesome then got a pin for a 5 count with a splash off the top. Rougeau then said that after the pinfall under Canadian rules, that Storm gets a 10 count to continue. They kept going. Storm got a near fall 4 count after a chair shot. Awesome did a twisting power slam off the top ropes and both men went through a table. Dave Penzer then stated the first man up at the count of 10 would be the winner. Does anyone in the company think about that statement? They hadn't even counted 10 when this was said. How would you know that one person was getting up and the other wasn't before the count of 10? When they did this finish in a way to make sense, they count both men out for 10. Then the announcement is made about the first man up. Anyway, Awesome got up first.
Rougeau decked him before Johnson saw him up.
Storm then got up and was ruled the winner. Bret Hart then came out, getting easily double the pop of anyone else on the show, with the announcers teasing what he'd do and with him looking embarrassed to even be associated with such a bad script. He hugged Storm and Rougeau to a big pop. Dud. 9. Muta and Vampiro Ian Hodgkinson won the WCW tag titles from Chronic in 9:06.
No heat and not much to the match. Muta blew the mist but hit ref Mickey J.
They teased a high times on Muta but Vampiro saved him. At this point, Ron and Don Harris returned and attacked Chronic, allowing Muta to pin Clark after a moonsault. Dud. 10. Kevin Nash won the 3-way to get the title shot over Bill Goldberg and Scott reached Steiner, in 10:48.
Really, this pay-per-view was built around this match.
The only way this shoot stuff works in the ring is if the style in the ring looks different.
That's like mentioned before, how Hashimoto and Ogawa, with the same basic scenario, drew monster TV ratings over the past 20 months, with their feud as well as incredible heat and front-page newspaper coverage. As soon as someone says a 24 rating in Japan doesn't count, remind them that the biggest television hit in the United States, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, was from a concept originated for a television show originated as a big hit overseas before anyone in this country had ever heard of it. Not that any pro wrestling could do that number in this culture, but you can learn a hell of a lot on how to do things that do work from what works elsewhere, and slightly tweaking it based on cultural differences. Anyway, they announced Goldberg was in a motorcycle accident in Sturgis, which was true, and he had road rash, which is why he was all bandaged up when he came out the day before and wasn't there, which wasn't true as he'd been there all day. Nash did an interview basically trying to get over that Goldberg was faking an injury to get out of the match. They played Goldberg's music twice and he never came out, acting as though Russo was trying to embarrass Goldberg because he's known for being vindictive. Just after the match started, Goldberg came out. The idea was for him to attack Nash's knee, but instead he started throwing punches and kicked Steiner. Goldberg began selling his taped up ribs. Nash went for a power bomb on Goldberg, who wouldn't go up and walked away. The announcers started freaking out in the most annoying tone possible about how Goldberg was supposed to go up for the finish and refused to do so. Goldberg walked off.
Russo confronted him and Goldberg swore at him and left.
They kept calling Goldberg a crybaby and unprofessional, insinuating he went against the script and wouldn't do the book job.
Nash and Steiner continued with this lumbering match that, thanks to Steiner, wasn't that bad at first.
Then they did a ref bump and Midaja delivered a low blow to Nash.
Can you imagine after the build-up of a supposed shoot, aside from doing wrestling spots poorly, you have a woman run in and the guys sell for her? Nash gave Steiner a low blow. Midaja gave Nash a low blow. Nash came back with the worst DDT of 2000 on Steiner. That was explained on the air, basically saying that because Nash and Steiner hadn't laid anything out so they didn't know what to do. Midaja continued to pound on Nash with lame offense. At one point near the finish, and I don't think this made the air, she was supposed to run in and break up a pin, she hesitated for some reason, and Steiner screamed, "Get in here." Nash came back with a high kick and a power bomb for the pin. The announcer's insinuation here, after all this, screaming how Steiner went up for the move, is that Steiner really wasn't beat, but he did the job as he was told, unlike crybaby Goldberg. Dud.
11.
Booker T. Booker Huffman pinned Jeff Jarrett to retain the WCW title in 14:30. A well-worked match. Unfortunately, now the announcers were trying to sell this as an all-time classic match some 5 minutes into the match. They still haven't learned a thing from Ross.
Ross saves that stuff for when the match really is a classic, and doesn't start talking about it until 15 minutes in when one can at least make the argument it deserves it.
5 minutes into a match that is good, just kills anything the announcers would say even if the match did develop into a classic. T sold his knee the entire match. First T accidentally backhanded Johnson. With no ref, Jarrett hit T's bad knee with a guitar shot and did the figure 4.
Johnson recovered but T made the ropes. Jarrett grabbed the title belt and went to hit T, but he ducked and Johnson took a second bump.
T gave Jarrett a Uranage off the apron through a table. Jamie Tucker then ran in. Jarrett hit Tucker with such a lame chair shot that the crowd groaned.
That's a third ref bump.
Charles Robinson ran in. T did a messed up neckbreaker spot on a chair. It was the only thing in the match that the two did, at least to each other, that didn't look professional. They did an All Japan finish where T went for the Uranage. Jarrett blocked it, but T reversed the block and finally hit the move for the pin. 3 stars. Fans live showed the ring with garbage after the match, and those live said it was because of disgust with the show and not because of heat by Jarrett. All Japan announced preliminary plans to revive the Triple Crown title vacated when Kenta Kobashi left the promotion, with a tournament that would end on the company's 28th anniversary show on October 28 at Budokan Hall. All the details haven't been worked out, but with only 2 major native wrestlers, Toshiaki Kawada and Masa Fuchi, under contract, to make this idea work would require bringing in some big-name wrestlers from other promotions, and basically New Japan. It is believed that Kawada, Genichiro Tenryu and Jinsei Shinzaki would head up the field. They are publicly saying they want the top stars from Noah in the tournament, but that sounds like a grandstand type of deal to babyface themselves. Obviously the prime candidate to make this work would be Kensuke Sasaki, since Sasaki holds the IWGP Heavyweight title and thus his being in would give it at least some world title credibility. Whether New Japan would allow its world champion to go into a world title-like tournament for another promotion, unless he's promised the win, is a big question mark. With the competition from NFL preseason, the pro wrestling audience dropped to 8.7 million as both shows on August 14th did well under their season average. Raw drew a 5.87 rating, 5.24 first hour, 6.50 second hour, and a 9.4 share. Nitro was hovering at the record low level, even coming off a pay-per-view with a 2.40 rating, 2.69 first hour, 2.11 second hour, and a 3.8 share. Out of the 19 weeks since the Kevin Sullivan regime was dumped, the Vince Russo regime now has 8 of its shows drawing lower ratings than the all-time low mark, 2.52, that Sullivan's regime drew, since the show went to 2 hours in 1996. With the exception of the show on July 3rd, which has the strong holiday weekend excuse, this was the lowest rated 2-hour Nitro in history in its regular time slot. It started out bad as the Goldberg-Russo shoot angle drew a 2.00 rating, making it the lowest rated unopposed quarter hour in the regular time slot in the history of the show. Now you can't blame the rating on the shoot angle failing because people didn't know ahead of time what was going to be there, but opening the show with such a low number has to be blamed on the fact fewer people than ever care about the product as a whole, and that if intrigue coming off a pay-per-view mean anything to ratings, which is questionable, then this pay-per-view was a major turnoff. There was no other major story in the ratings. Raw's main event of Angle and Triple H and Shane vs. Dudley's and Rock drew a 6.53 final quarter and a 7.19 overrun. Solid numbers but below what the show has been averaging of late.
Nitro had no main event, as the advertised Nash vs. Steiner match never took place. But that segment with Nash interviewing a cardboard cutout of Hall and the four-way with Sting, Vampiro, Muta and Demon drew a 1.89 rating.
Head-to-head numbers were Raw at 4.79, Angle, Triple H, Shane Foley interview, did 2.25, Booker vs. Jarrett, Lit vs. Smiley, Raw at 4.86, Blackman and Guerrero vs. Tanda, to 2.27, Vampiro and Muta vs. Mysterio Jr. and Guerrera, Raw at 5.48, RTC vs. Hardys and Lita, to 1.99, Skipper vs. Kiwi, and Raw at 5.81, Edge, Christian and Foley out, beginning of Undertaker vs. Benoit, to 1.89. SmackDown on August 10th drew a 4.70 rating.
Thunder on August 9th drew a 2.39 rating and 4.0 share. Rating built most of the way, peaking at 2.62 for Kidman vs. Reno, and then dropping slightly over the remaining segments.
The Madden/Okerlund match drew a 2.47. Weekend numbers for August 12th to 13th saw Livewire at 1.1, third highest rated show of the day on USA, Superstars at 1.2, ninth highest rated, which actually made it the third lowest rated show on USA between 10 a.m. and midnight, and Heat at 2.72, highest rated. The WCW Saturday morning show was up 2 and 0.9. Still it was the lowest rated show on the station between 8:30 a.m. and 2 a.m. ECW on TNN on August 11th also drew an 0.9 rating. The August 8th Lucha Libre block on Galavision drew a 1.9 Hispanic rating. Mexico.
Perro Aguayo is out for a few weeks, as he's banged up from so much wrestling at his age, 54.
He should be back at the end of September for the anniversary show. By the way, when is he retiring? Lottie Apache has jumped to AAA. Damian beat Pimpinela Escarlata in a hair match on August 14 in Nuevo Laredo. The day before in the same city, Sangre Chicana beat Cobarde in a hair match.
The Global Wrestling All-Stars promotion, which debuts shortly, announced it would provide all wrestlers with both medical and life insurance for their base wrestlers, and claimed they already have 50 wrestlers under contract and want 70, but the only names mentioned are Sealbed King, Gandhi and Fishman.
They also announced the Zona Muerte pay-per-view, which would have Sealbed King and Dondi and Enrique Berra vs. Jake Roberts, and Doink the Clown and Marty Jannetty as the main event, a masked tournament with Dr. Wagned Hunyod, Bismarck, Biliano Cinco, Fishman, La Parca, Blue Ponted,
Shu El Guerrero, Solat and Mascara Sagrada.
A triple hair versus hair match with Tony Arce and Vulcano and Rocco Valente versus Alcon Dorado Hunyod and Andy Barro and Conde Bardock.
They said they'd be able to use EMLL wrestlers on their pay-per-view shows but not on their TV shows, which air on TV Azteca, a rival of Televisa, which has the contract with EMLL.
The TV looks to start from 10 a.m. to noon in September, and they plan 6 pay-per-view shows, mostly at the 30,000-seat Palacio de los Deportes in Mexico City. AAA is starting a heel turn for Heavy Metal. It started on August 11 in Tijuana. First, in an IWC heavyweight title match, Hector Garza retained, beating Pirata Morgan.
In the first fall, when Morgan had Garza in a submission, Heavy Metal ran in and grabbed the towel from Latin Lobet and threw it in, signifying a submission. He then went on the house mic and said he did it because Garza was getting his ass beat so bad.
Garza ended up winning, and Morgan challenged him to a hair versus hair match right then and there, which Garza also won. Morgan ran off without getting his head shaved, with the announcer saying since they hadn't actually signed for the match, Morgan didn't have to get his head shaved. It's really cool how stip matches still draw in Mexico and why, particularly in such a wrestling hotbed as Tijuana, it's so stupid to kill stips this way. As you could imagine, the fans, used to stips being honored, were pissed. Latin and Heavy teamed in the main event with Suped Crazy, losing to heel Cibernetico and Sandokan and Abismo Negro largely because Latin and Heavy couldn't get along. Lismark Hunyod is out with an injury to his right foot. Gigante Silva returned to Arena Mexico on August 11 in the main event, teaming with Brazo de Plata and Raide Jalisco Hunyod to win a 3-on-4 over Sin Caras and Apolo Dantes and Scorpio Hunyod and Shoked, ending when he came off the top rope with a flying body press onto 2 guys for the pin. He's still there on August 18, which includes a CMLL tag title defense with Rey Bucanero and Ultimo Guerrero defending against Mead Niebla and Emilio Charles Hunyod. El Brazo Hunyod will be making his debut soon to form a trio with Brazo de Oro Hunyod and Brazo de Plata Hunyod. Pro Wrestling Noah. Takao Omori had surgery on his right elbow on August 9 for torn cartilage. They did an angle on August 6 to explain it, where he first lariated the ring post and submitted to an armbar. They are saying he'll be back in September, but it may be another month. Both the September 15th and September 16th shows at Differ Ariake also sold out. The first day tickets were put on sale on August 12. October will be the first real test, as they are running shows at Nagoya Aichi Gym and Yokohama Bunka Gym. August 2nd TV, which was the final multi-promotion TV before it started August 9th as a full Noah show, drew a 1.8 rating. New Japan. In addition to his chronic neck problems, Masahiro Chono is also suffering from ankle problems. Tadao Yasuda was also hobbled by a badly swollen ankle, while Tenzan suffered a knee injury on August 12 but still worked on August 13. Riki Choshu after the G1 said that he would not wrestle again. The major shows in September were announced, and again it's largely disappointing. Don Fry returns for the tour. The tour opens on September 9 in Kuroha for the Masakazu Fukuda Memorial Show with Nagata and Iizuka and Sasaki vs Tenzan and Fry and Chono on top, plus Nakanishi vs Yoshi, Liger and Koshinaka vs Michiyoshi Ohara and Goto. The big item on the tour is that Nakanishi will have 8 major singles matches against Yoshi, Yasuda, Suzuki, Koshinaka, Iizuka, Johnston, Kojima, and Ohara, which is also considered a letdown since he isn't facing Chono, Nagata and Sasaki, which would be the 3 matches with the most intrigue. September 13th in Sendai will have Takaiwa vs Kashin for the IWGP Junior title, which may be booked as a way for Kashin to get his heat back, so to speak, in case he doesn't fare well on the Pride show at the Seibu Dome in what is expected to be a shoot match against Ryan Gracie. The biggest show of the tour is September 16th at Nagoya Aichi Gym, with Nakanishi vs Kojima on top, which is a terribly weak main event for a major arena, plus Johnston and Sasaki vs Nagata and Iizuka, Yoshi and Koshinaka vs Fry and Tenzan and Liger and Kashin vs Koji Kanemoto and Minoru Tanaka. Osamu Nishimura, who is still suffering from testicular cancer, even though he's been wrestling, is leaving for India looking for a miracle cure. August 5th TV show with Choshu vs Onita and the Takaiwa Junior title win over Liger drew a 3.9 rating. On the surface, that doesn't sound great for the Choshu Onita dream match, but the show airs at 3 a.m. and I doubt Raw could do better than half that number if it aired in that slot. Liger vs Takaiwa was a 3.5 match. It was funny in a way, because even though it was very good, it was a junior title match with no high-flying and mainly just high-impact power moves, with the only difference from a heavyweight title match with Sasaki vs Nakanishi, for example, aside from better work of course, was that the pacing was quicker. Liger concentrated on arm bars, but Takaiwa came back with the injured right arm, hurting himself, delivering the 5 lariats for the win. There seems to be a lot of talk of basically phasing out the juniors as a separate division, since they are all doing less high-flying due to injuries, and have them work with the heavyweights, since this does give the main division added depth at a time it needs it, and the juniors have wrestled each other to the point from a booking standpoint it's stale. The fact the juniors have been buried for so long when facing heavyweights, and with Liger and Takaiwa not having good win-loss records in G1. They've preconditioned fans not to take them seriously as drawing threats, only as guys who will put on good matches and then ultimately lose. Other Japan notes. Atsushi Onita on August 9 did a Gong magazine interview saying he wants to team up with Riki Choshu on the October 28 All Japan 28th anniversary show at Budokan Hall. The odds of this taking place are minuscule, and it was basically just something said to get his name in the paper, I'm guessing. Koto Fuyuki vs Hayabusa in an explosive dynamite match headlines the FMW show on September 21 in Sapporo at the Tsukisame Dome. Wrestling International News magazine reported in its August 1 issue that Alexander Karelin would retire after the Sydney Olympics. In the interview, Karelin, 33, said that he had done one Vale Tudo-like event, which was actually a pro wrestling match with rings against Akira Maeda last year, but would never do another. There had been a lot of interest not only among pro wrestling promoters in the US, including the WWF at various times, but even more so in Japan about using him after the Olympics. Big Japan's winger broke 6 bones in his face, including his jaw, in a match on August 5 in Isazaki, and will be out of action for about 6 months. The next major match for that company is August 29 with Ryuji Yamakawa vs John Zandig for Zandig's deathmatch title. Saw the Big Japan death match from last week in Tokyo. They actually didn't run anyone over with a car, but teased the spot.
These guys are so sloppy and try so many killer moves they look like they're just killing each other. They did set the ring on fire and do dives off production trucks through flaming tables and the like and all the barbed wire bumps. It did look like they had a good crowd. The August 5th All Japan Women's TV show, which aired after midnight, drew a 3.1 rating, which is very strong for a hot show featuring highlights of the 3 cards at the Fuji Network TV studios July 14th to July 16th. It was a really hot TV show airing the Minami Toyota vs. Eagle Soi WWWA title match. Really good, including Toyota doing a leap off the top of a ladder on a WWF-like stage with a plancha off the stage onto the floor, as well as a flip dive from about 8 feet or 9 feet up off one of the lighting posts, which she actually landed slightly short on. Azumi Hyuga vs. Tomoko Watanabe All Pacific title, also very good, and the tag tournament, which from the highlights looked good as well. Last year they had really hot crowds and very good action, but it was marred because it rained some nights, and poured others. There were some amazing matches in the rain, but this year, they just had a lot of wind to contend with, and thus the match quality was a lot better. The tag title match with Momoe Nakanishi and Nani Takahashi beating Etsuko Mita and Mima Shimoda in the finals was one of the best matches so far this year. Nakanishi is tiny and only 20 years old, but she's a tremendous worker. The production values on the show, being in an outdoor studio setting that held just under 2,000 with a stage and elaborate ring entrances, were really below only WWF and K1 level. With Yuko Kasugi, AWF champion, retiring, they will be having a one-night tournament for her title on the August 27th JD show at Differ Ariake. Ayako Hamada won the Sky High version title, similar to a junior heavyweight title, from Mari Apache on August 12th in Nagoya. Here and there. Road Warrior Hawk, Mike Hegstrand, 42, was hospitalized for several days in Melbourne, Australia after what was reported as cardiac problems as well as fluid in the lungs. He was rushed to the hospital during the August 5th show in Melbourne and was finally allowed to return home to Florida on August 10th. Aside from so-so crowds, the remainder of the Australian tour was cancelled because by that point Hawk, Animal, Dennis Rodman, who had no more dates booked, and Paul Orndorff had all been injured. In addition, the ensuing tour of New Zealand with the Road Warriors as the headline act also had to be cancelled. Promoter Andrew McManus claimed he had made a $20,000 profit in total on the tour and would do another one in March, claiming that rumors it was a big loser are false. McManus blamed the cancellations of the final dates on Curt Hennig's bad knee going out and he had to return to the US for surgery, and that the tour couldn't continue without him. A&E filmed a bunch of stuff with Gene Kiniski last week, for a special scheduled in the fall. At the Reform Party convention, they played Hulk Hogan's old WWF Real American theme as Buchanan's music, as well as American Made from WCW later and Roddy Piper's WWF bagpipes entrance. Mitch Snow, who wrestled in the AWA and in the Mid-Atlantic area in the late 80s and early 90s, passed away from a suicide on August 3rd. Snow was apparently despondent over the death of his father the previous day, and of his brother 1 month earlier. I'd guess Snow to have been in his early 30s. Rick Davidson of the Davidson Brothers tag team in the late 70s passed away on August 5th at his home in Fort Worth, Texas. One of the preachers at the service was Ken Johnson, who worked as Slick as a WWF manager in the 80s. Davidson helped get Johnson into wrestling, doing outlaw shows around Texas with him in the early 80s with the Renestos brothers, John and Tom Jr. When Tom Sr. was booking Los Angeles, the Davidsons were used as the Top Hill tag team in the dying days of the LaBelle promotion in 1981. He was probably very late 40s. Beyond the Mat will have a theatrical release in Japan in December. The DVD, which comes out on August 22nd, will have separate audio commentary by Terry Funk, Mick Foley and Barry Blaustein, as well as new footage not in the original movie. Mike Marcello, a Florida independent wrestler, was found dead in his home in Newport Richey, Florida on August 15th. I believe he was in his late 20s. We didn't have any details at press time, but Marcello was trained by Dean Malenko and was later a trainer at the Malenko School of Wrestling. Got sent a copy of the 1947 yearbook from Southwest High in Minneapolis from the senior year of Gordon Soley. His real name he went by in high school was Jonard Schoblom and was nicknamed Josie. He took the name Gordon Soley when he went into broadcasting. He was also awarded Best Line, Biggest Flirt and Most Talkative in his class. I can just imagine Gordon Soley picking up women in high school saying look at the development in his quadricep femoris and spinae erector muscles, which for those of you who didn't grow up watching Georgia wrestling, is actually your hamstrings and low back. The IWA in Puerto Rico will be doing a Bruiser Brody Memorial Cup in November or December.
Ron Fuller is closing out his summer Friday night series at Chilhowie Park on August 26th with a benefit show with all proceeds going to benefit a young man named Brett Young with mounting medical bills. They held a press conference and announced that Fuller, who had guessed to be around 51 or 52 and hasn't wrestled since 1988 after being the area's top babyface in the late 70s and 80s as well as promoter, funny how those things go hand in hand, would wrestle Terry Landell, so the angle with Jim Cornette out of the picture is back on. They're billing this as a yawn shoot match as Fuller claimed fans should be thrilled to know this will be an historic match. It will be the first ever real shoot professional wrestling match in the history of Tennessee wrestling. What this means is no predetermined winner, no pulled punches. Geez, Terry Landell, while carrying a mace canister, ran from a 5-2 woman only a few weeks back in the Cornette incident. Like he's going to do a shoot against a guy, even at that age, who is 6'7" and trained in real wrestling under his family from childhood. Remember Paul Alperstein, the multimillionaire from the credit card industry who funded the old AWF? His other business also failed in a quagmire of lawsuits and he's now waiting tables at a deli outside of Chicago. Reportedly Victor Jovica, the part owner of WWC, passed out from high blood pressure in what appeared to be a heart attack during a match with Dutch Mantle on August 12th in a cage match in Humacao, Puerto Rico. It's very strange, if only because they are doing an angle where Mantle is attempting a hostile takeover of WWC, and they use Jovica in the TV role as the majority stockholder in the company. They were doing the cage match when Jovica, a huge star in the company in the 70s and early 80s who once drew at least one crowd of more than 30,000 against Ric Flair, collapsed from what appeared to be a heart attack in a scene eerily similar to the Fritz von Erich deal in the late 80s. Paramedics arrived 25 minutes later and Jovica was rushed to the hospital and diagnosed with 170/110 and spent the night at the hospital under his blood pressure was back under control and went back to work the next day and was scheduled to leave for a business meeting on August 16th in Croatia. On an indie show at the infamous Wonderland Greyhound Park in Revere, Massachusetts, famous for the Eric Kulas incident, an indie show on September 8th has a match featuring Mass Transit Kulas, in apparently his first match in a few years since New Jack sliced his forehead open, with the advertising tagline, "Will history repeat itself?" Can you believe a promotion would stoop to that level? I know, of course you can. More on the FMW video releases. It has been moved to October 3rd. Originally it was August 29th. Because TokyoPop.com wants more advertising out in wrestling and entertainment journals. They'll be distributed at Musicland Corporation and other retail outlets. The FMW matches and new Americanized storylines, see last week's issue, will be augmented by scantily clad Asian female models demonstrating wrestling moves on each other. MMA. 3 more matches added to the August 27th Pride show at the Seibu Dome are Wanderlei Silva vs Guy Mesger, Rico Rodriguez vs Giant Okiachi, who fought at the last Sekendo show and sounds like a bad gimmick fighter for Rodriguez to squash, and Masaaki Sadake, the former K1 star, against Kazunari Murakami who worked as Naoya Ogawa's partner in New Japan. I don't know how to handicap that latter match except that if Murakami can't get Sadake off his feet, he's in a lot of trouble. Murakami was a name from the early years of the sport in the United States. He did knock out Bart Valley in the old Extreme Fighting promotion many years ago, but was then knocked out by Maurice Smith in one of the most devastating finishes ever when challenging for the old ESC heavyweight title. DSC has invited Tatsumi Fujinami, Motoko Baba, Mitsuharu Misawa, Toshiaki Kawada, Masafuchi Kazuyoshi Ishii, K1 president, and Satoru Sayama to sit in VIP ringside seats for the show, probably in great part as a grandstand attempt to boost attendance from pro wrestling and K1 fans. They announced that Kazushi Sakuraba vs Henzo Gracie would be in the main event position, and that Tokumitsu Ishizawa, Kendo Kashin, vs Ryan Gracie would be second from the top, so Kazuyuki Fujita vs Ken Shamrock would be third from the top. Naoya Ogawa will second Murakami in his match and Nobuhiko Takada will second Sakuraba. The Ring's debut show in Orem, Utah last month drew less than 1,000 fans. ECW. Highlights from the August 11th tapings in Fort Lauderdale. Best match said to be a 6-man with the FBI, leading Tao and Whipwreck and Psychosis when Tao hit Psychosis with the mist. Tao then had Guido set for the brainbuster, but Psychosis kicked him low and Guido pinned him with the Maritato. Anderson, getting the big push, scored a pin on Dreamer due to interference by Diamond and Swinger. In what appeared to be the TNN Open, Lou E dangerously did the danger zone with Cyrus. Corino and Anton confronted him with Corino heavily swearing. By the end of the segment, Anton turned back heel on Corino and rejoined the network. Cyrus ended talking about how great TNN was and the fans chanted USA, and not because Cyrus is Canadian. Credible beat Cash in the exact same match on TV that night except Credible scored the pin. Van Dam beat Rhino in a short match when Credible interfered for the DQ and Sandman saved him. In St. Pete, they moved Chilly Willy all the way up to the main event with Sandman beating Credible and Rhino, which ended when Sandman pinned Rhino after putting him through a table. They also did Whipwreck and Tao vs. Guido and Mamaluke, which was said to have been the best match of the weekend, with Mamaluke looking the best he has looked since coming to ECW. Both matches were basically to get guys ready for their tag tourney matches, and the bouts were said to be good. There is some talk that New Jack will be out of action for a longer time than expected after his recent surgery, as his ankle looked really bad at the shows. The feeling on Psychosis after being in for a full weekend is that he's nowhere near what he was when he first came to ECW in 1995, and not the wrestler Super Crazy is, but he bumps and sells well, gets a good pop coming out, and is still a good worker who makes his opponent look good, so will be valuable as a mid-card guy. Not much to the TNN show on August 11th, which featured tons more knocks at the network. The show opened with Lou E dangerously in the ring with so much debris thrown at him it was scary. Corino and Riggs were out arguing with him to put them over as faces. Credible came out and Corino got in his face after insulting his catchphrase to set up a tag team feud with Rhino, who ended up involved as well. During and Roadkill beat Bill Wiles, now doing the Bill vs. Wesley gimmick, and Prodigy. There were a million Elvis references during the match. It was funny because they showed C.W. Anderson decking both Prodigy and Jazz, being that an Anderson hates women wrestling, but then digitized it when Tao sprayed the mist in Elektra's face after she slapped him. They also digitized someone involved in a pull-apart backstage with Cash and Credible saying he wouldn't sign the release form to appear on such a crummy network. Tao beat EZ Money, who is physically looking a lot better and has been looking good in the ring. Credible and Cash in a title match had no finish when Rhino interfered spearing Cash, and then Van Dam made the save. Most of the show was directed at building up the tag team tournament on August 25th. WCW. Nitro on August 14th from Kelowna, BC blew away the pay-per-view, which isn't as high a praise as it sounds, being that most of the reaction to Nitro was negative as well. It was very heavy on dirty language to the point it really had no shock value after 5 minutes into the show. At least the wrestling was better than the night before. They opened with Russo trying to do this shoot deal where Abbott was going to kick Goldberg's ass. It was hilarious. Russo's out there trying to get over that the match at the Phillips Arena was a work with a script, but this match doesn't have a script. They came back from a commercial and you see them calling spots. Abbott selling a kick that missed and doing a pro wrestling brawl using Irish whips and other moves that actually don't work in a real fight. Since Abbott has actually done real fights and Goldberg has trained for them, you'd think they'd be able to work one without having to throw in pro wrestling spots. Russo demanded they go to a commercial as Goldberg was winning out. At least Russo was a good heel and the crowd hated him, but this segment put the show in the toilet from the start. Kidman and Vito beat Reno and Douglas in a match where they all worked hard. Douglas tried to handcuff Kidman, but Vito handcuffed Douglas to the corner. Before they could do much damage to Douglas, O'Hare and Jindrak and Stasiak and Palumbo came out as the fearsome foursome and Reno left with them. FA's brought out a Mrs. Jones, which is just what the company needs when cutting costs is another useless model on a show overloaded with them. Stacy, who used to be Miss Hancock, told David she was pregnant. Before she came out was an acting job which required major guns to show emotion and cry. I take back everything I've ever written about Stephanie McMahon's acting ability after that angle. Storm got a huge face pop for a Pro-Canada promo. Kat was a total heel setting up a match with Storm. Kat played total heel ref until Jacques Rojo interfered as a babyface and Carl Ouellet, hey, maybe they can do a match with Nash that nobody understands, did a cannonball on Awesome to set up Storm winning with a half crab. Elix Skipper also came out with the gimmick he's Canadian since he once played Canadian football and they formed the Team Canada. There was some talk of trying to get Robert Malay Kurgan in there as Storm's bodyguard. Storm then gave the hardcore title to Ouellet and the cruiserweight belt to Skipper. Jarrett beat Booker via DQ in what was billed as Jarrett's final title shot in 6:54 when Goldberg attacked Jarrett and threw him over the guardrail. This was a better match than their pay-per-view match. Originally this was going to be an I Quit match, but I guess it was changed. Somehow I don't believe this is really Jarrett's last title shot. Smiley then beat Ouellet to win the hardcore title. Ouellet nearly killed Smiley doing a running flip dive to the floor. Ouellet came off the top rope with a cannonball through a table, but ref Charles Robinson had pulled Smiley to safety,
and when the table broke, Smiley fell on top for the pin. Actually, as stupid stuff goes, this finish was clever stupid stuff.
The storyline is that Smiley was mad he won because he doesn't want to do hardcore matches. Nash did an interview saying he refused to wrestle Steiner because why does Steiner deserve a second chance when Scott Hall doesn't get one? Mysterio Jr. and Guerrero won the tag titles from Muta and Vampiro. Harris twins attacked Chronic at ringside. Muta Blue missed at Hoovy when the lights went out and Sting came out. When the lights came on, everyone was lying on the ground dead and Disco rolled Ray on top of Muta for the pin. Sting supposedly had laid him out with a baseball bat, although he was fine, and didn't even have a headache when they demanded a match with Sting immediately after this. This was also a pretty good match, although it makes the tag belts look horrible when Ray and Hoovy, who have done nothing but get punked out by big guys since Ray came back, backdoored into the tag titles. Skipper kept the cruiser belt beating Kwee-Wee.
Regarding the latest papaya, see comments on Mrs. Jones. Skipper is a great athlete with cool moves, but he looks very green out there.
He's using a Grey Cup ring, Canadian Football League Championship, for his foreign object finisher. He pulled it out, never used it, and a minute later used it for the finish. He really needs to learn timing and psychology and usage of a foreign object. A four-way with Sting, Muta, Demon and Vampiro saw Demon turn on Sting and Muta.
Earlier he had demanded the match.
Sting beat Muta with the Scorpion in 204.
Muta got to job twice on the same show. Muta and Vampiro cleaned house afterwards and backstage went to stab Sting with a spike, but Demon made the save with a baseball bat.
Nash did an interview doing nothing but pushing the return of Hall. Bringing Hall back is dumb because it just shows the boys there is no discipline in the company. Not bringing Hall back at this point with all the hype they've built for his return is also dumb.
It's always better to book angles with win/win propositions if things don't go right instead of lose/lose no matter which decision is made.
Nash challenged Booker for the title. Booker came out in clothes but was attacked by Steiner walking to the ring. Goldberg backstage picked up Midaja for a jackhammer, and the screen went blank. When Steiner got backstage, Midaja was out cold on top of a broken table.
Notes from the August 15th tapings in Kamloops, BC.
Said to be really bad. FAs recruited Mike Sanders as something of a pledge, but he turned on them before the night was over. David asked Stacy to marry him, but before he could get the words out, Wall attacked him and left him laying. Stacy was mad because he couldn't even propose right but took the ring from his pocket. Crowbar, who had the best match on the card in a dark match against local Adam Pringle, who he gave a lot of offense to, tried to tell Daphne what he felt, but then Daphne got another present. In what was said to be the stupidest finish on a badly booked show, Mysterio Jr. and Guerrero beat O'Hare and Jindrak via DQ. O'Hare and Jindrak had the match won when Reno and Palumbo attacked Ray and Hoovy, thus allowing them to save their belts. Bout had no heat. Sanders turned on Disco when Disco tried to do a save before the finish.
Team Canada beat MIA, which set up Kat doing a promo.
Kat screwed up the promo, missing all the important points, so they had an 8-minute delay and Kat cut the same promo over, saying his bout with Storm was Canadian title versus commissionership with Team Canada banned. Well, neither changed since Ouellette interfered when Storm was beat. Yep, they made Storm look bad in all three cities where the fans came more to see him than anyone else. Why is anyone surprised after seeing how Flair was booked when they ran the Carolinas the past 4 years?
They plugged Scott Steiner versus Nash for the #1 contendership, which again didn't take place.
But they did get a match described as a total disaster with Mean Gene versus Madden. Smiley came out to help Okerlund. Ouellette came out to help Madden. Vito was out.
Madden was on the top waiting literally forever for Pamela Paulshock to show up and crotch him, totally ruining the finish when Gene got the pin.
This apparently sets up Madden versus Pamela at some point. They had a 15-minute delay which first saw 3-count dance and storyline. They had already left the building, then Smiley danced with them, then Smiley attacked them, and then Smiley danced with Nitro Girls. Ouellette got zero reaction in Canada in losing to Vito, which turned out to be the main event. Goldberg attacked Rick Steiner, who went out in an ambulance, and then Goldberg made fun of what he did to Midaja. Show ended with Nash doing an interview calling out Booker. They both played babyface, although the crowd was 50% booing Booker from the start.
When Nash turned heel and jumped Booker, this led to 100% cheers for Nash.
Booker made his own comeback, but this may have been after cameras went off. Notes from Thunder on August 8 in Colorado Springs, Colorado, which aired the next day. From our reports, the best match on the show was taped for Worldwide with Mysterio Jr. and Disco and Guerrero over Young Dragons. Worldwide is put together by Dave Penzer in the afternoon once the Thunder show is booked. largely by Ed Ferrara, and Penzer basically uses the leftover guys. It's become funny because they often have the better matches, and it's basically acknowledged that Penzer has a lot better idea of who to put in the ring against each other to have a good match and the ability of the participants than the people who actually make the matches on Raw and Nitro.
For the main show, which was pretty bad, Chronic won a 2-on-4 over Jindrak and O'Hare and Stasiak and Palumbo. The rules were that if Chronic was pinned, whomever got the pin and their regular partner would become tag champs. Even though Mike Tenay explained the steps, Stevie Ray couldn't grasp them. Match got progressively worse as it went on and ended up being really bad with Clark pinning Stasiak after the high times. The FAs stole the tag belts again. Skipper beat Crowbar. Basically this was a backdrop for Crowbar wanting to ask Daphne something, either to be his girlfriend or his wife, but getting tongue-tied.
Then I Am Smooth brought out flowers for Daphne, but said he was just delivering them from a secret admirer. Skipper's new primetime nickname is sort of funny since he messed up his finisher again.
During the show, Jarrett KO'd Jimmy Hart, Ed Ferrara and Dave Penzer with guitar shots.
Penzer was shaken up a bit from his apparently and had a small cut, but appeared fine later on.
3 count and Abbott beat MIA when Moore and Helms both came off a ladder onto Cajun after Abbott punched him.
It was so funny seeing Abbott out there trying to do high spots. Smiley beat Mike Sanders in a hardcore match.
Smiley was also KO'd by a Jarrett guitar shot backstage, but since they have to do the pins in the ring, he was wheeled in by Sanders in a wheelbarrow.
In the ring, Sanders went to hit him with a chair but instead ended up hitting himself with the chair for the pin.
Storm beat Awesome in a flag match that only went 157, just long enough for Mighty Heidi to turn on Awesome and take off her shirt revealing, no not that, but a Canadian t-shirt underneath.
If this is S storyline way to get rid of her, then that's fine since Awesome was being killed by that stupid gimmick. If not, well, they can bring someone else in for the spot and continue to kill him. Kidman was making out with Reno's girlfriend. David Flair and Hancock beat AWOL and Major Guns in a horrible tables match. Hancock whipped Guns into a table to win. AWOL but David threw a table after. Kidman beat Reno via DQ when Douglas interfered and Douglas whipped him with a belt to set up their strap match. Vito made the save.
This was the best stuff on the show. Reno was very impressive for his primetime debut and Kidman looked very good as well.
Booker T did a long interview. Kind of boring really. Bagwell and Gene Okerlund beat Canyon and Mark Madden in all of 5:18 when Madden tried to low-blow Gene, who then pulled out a cup, rubbed it in Madden's face, and Bagwell gave him the blockbuster.
Judy Bagwell was at ringside to make this even more torture.
At least Okerlund and Madden did everything right, even if it didn't necessarily look good what they were doing. The stuff where they made Madden do a high spot must have been so the boys would laugh at him because there was no reason for that.
Cat and Sting beat Vampiro and Muta in the main event.
Cat looked so bad in this match that the other three had no chance to save it. Cat pinned Vampiro after a kick, but after the match Muta blew the mist at both Sting and Cat and Demon put Sting in the Scorpion. How did they get a shot on a taped show of a sign that read Russo fears McMahon? Lance Storm had a booking on TSN's Off the Record pulled by The Office and nobody is clear as to why they turned down one of their wrestlers getting national primetime exposure in Canada, particularly since TSN just signed a 5-year renewal of its WCW deal. Conan had his pay cut in half because he's injured even though he's been at almost every TV.
On the pay-per-view, Jarrett called Booker T boy several times. There has been talk of doing an angle where Vampiro would kidnap and torture one of the TV announcers.
They've cut way back on the Australia tour. Originally they were going to send 80 people total, now the figure is less than 40, and probably only 2 announcers.
A legit reason, as opposed to a simple ratings ploy, why the first Russo interview didn't air, could be his strong references to Booker T being held back and never getting a chance, the only major ground he didn't cover on the second interview that did air, because of the feeling it would look real bad for the company in the real lawsuit. The tour dates for the United Kingdom are November 10th at the London Arena for a Nitro taping that airs November 13th, November 11th in Newcastle at the Telewest Arena, November 12th in Manchester at the Men's Centre for the Thunder Show that airs November 15th, and November 13th in Birmingham at the NEC Arena. They will also do one date in Germany on November 16th, most likely a Germany-only pay-per-view date, before returning home.
Goldberg is coming in on August 30th to do a 4-day promotional swing to kick off ticket sales. WCW filed a lawsuit on July 24th against AWA Superstars of Wrestling claiming trademark infringement and unfair competition. The suit claimed AWA advertised that WCW trademark talent Lenny and Lodi might appear at a television taping on February 29th in Laughlin, Nevada. They didn't appear nor were ever booked to appear. They also claimed AWA referred to the Nitro girls in promotional materials sent to a promoter in Greeley, Colorado for a June 21 show. Terry Byrne, who was originally Nitro Girl Fire before being dumped from the troupe, has appeared on AWA shows. They also have sent promotional material referring to Tony DiNucci as WCW Rookie Sensation, even though DiNucci has never even been affiliated with WCW, or for that matter, isn't a rookie. Either add Jim Duggan and Brian Knobbs to the list of those cut. Juventud Guerrero was also on the list to be cut after his contract expires. There are forces at work trying to save his job, but we're told it's by no means a lock. Bret Hart will be getting yet another battery of tests done in September. During Brad Siegel's speech, he also announced fines for wrestlers arriving late to shows. It's $500 for a first offense, $1,000 for a second, $2,000 for a third, a 30-day suspension without pay for a fourth, and termination for a fifth. Nash was bragging afterwards that the new rules don't apply to him because in his contract there's a clause that the company doesn't have the right to fine him. For whatever this is worth, and probably not much, before the July pay-per-view, WCW made arrangements for a major public appearance for Jarrett in Toronto, telling the people they'd be sending the WCW World Champion. The week before this past pay-per-view, when the promoters asked about Jarrett, being that Booker T was the champ, and if they should continue to advertise him as WCW World Champion, people with WCW told them, "Don't worry, continue to advertise him as champion, because he'll be champion by that time. I believe August 25th. That's not to say he's winning the title next week, only that this is how the company treats the title. For the October 10th WCW show in Sydney, Australia, it is being billed as WCW Nitro in all the ads, even though it isn't a taping, with tiny wording saying not to be televised. An idea for a match sent in by Richard Sullivan. Tommy Rich, whose mother played the Judy Bagwell role 2 decades ago, versus Buff Bagwell with the two mothers on the stage, and every time one of them gets thrown over the top rope, their mom has to put on clothing. If you're wondering why SFX would be so interested in promoting live shows with ECW or WCW, a note from the August 17th Rolling Stone explains it. SFX owns numerous buildings around the country and is having problems filling dates. The note said SFX has a need to have their venues utilized every night, particularly during the summer, but this past year they've only had 23% occupancy, so they are just desperate to have tenants to fill dates. On the WCW pregame show, Larry Zbyszko, showing he watches Nitro every week, or maybe also showing the lack of quality control over the people who scripted his segments and produced his segments, when talking about the Sting Demon match, stated that we haven't seen Sting since he fell off the screen at the Great American Bash. Thunder tapings on August 8th in Colorado Springs, Colorado drew 1,983, paying $41,227. Nitro on August 14th in Kelowna, BC drew 3,693, paying $130,424 Canadian. Merchandise for the August 7th and August 8th shows, only shows of that week, was $33,705 or $6.26 per head, but again, with buildings heavily papered and the per head being based only on paid, it's a misleadingly high figure. WWF. The top matches for SummerSlam at this point look to be Rock vs. Angle vs. Triple H for the title, Jericho vs. Benoit 2 of 3 falls, Undertaker vs. Kane, Edge and Christian vs. Hardys vs. Dudleys in a ladders, tables and chairs match for the titles, Lawler vs. Taz, Venus and Stratus vs. Guerrero and Chyna, and Road Dogg vs. X-Pac. The Undertaker-Kane match was set up on a last-minute angle on August 14th, when the WWF sent Big Show home as a disciplinary measure. There are numerous reasons involved. Management believes Show is terribly out of shape and pushing him sets a bad example for the rest of the crew. I know you can bring up Undertaker and Rikishi aren't in tip-top condition, and don't get heat for it. He was sent to Louisville to get back in shape and threw up in training. He worked the house show on August 12th in Detroit and was given Benoit as tag partner against Undertaker and Kane in the main event, with the idea Benoit would work most of the match and he'd only have to go in for spots since he wasn't ready to perform, but still blew up quickly. He showed up the next night in Springfield, Massachusetts, but early in the night had back spasms and couldn't wrestle in his main event, and Albert, who wrestled in a 6-man tag earlier in the show, was put in the match teaming with Angle against Undertaker and Kane. Where he wound up with tremendous heat is whether this was real or not, and being wrestling nobody trusts anyone, is that after the show his back spasms cleared up and he left the building fine. He showed up the next day in Providence for Raw and they had an angle planned for him and the back spasms acted up. The decision was made to take him off the active roster and fill in for his SummerSlam spot by doing an Undertaker-Kane angle for the millionth time. There are many complaints that Show, who in many ways is a protege of Hogan,
can't get away from the Hogan training and diet regimen and is obsessed with getting bigger, which is actually humorous if you think about it, which takes away from his ability to perform in the ring because he's carrying excess weight. When his back problems subside, the plan is to send him full-time for the Mark Henry treatment at Ohio Valley Wrestling, until his conditioning it as what they consider acceptable levels. Raw on August 14 from Providence, Rhode Island started with the big speech. Angle did maybe his best interview of his career, comparing himself to Nancy Kerrigan and Triple H to Tanya Harding. Although he said they were in the same Olympics, they were in the Winter Olympics in 1994. He in the Summer Games in 1996. The interview was so good and Angle came across as such a heel that Triple H got a huge face reaction coming out, which apparently was something he was dreading all afternoon since everyone knows he's going face, but he wants to keep his heel reaction until the turn. They were about to fight, but Shane broke them up, saying it was making his sister mad. They did a show-long acolyte/Kaientai skit where Kaientai took them out for a night of drinking. The little Japanese children-like characters couldn't handle their liquor and got rude and obnoxious, and eventually Funaki threw up on Bradshaw and they beat them up. A totally racist segment on many levels. Speaking of the strangest sponsors, they have all those ads on Raw telling kids not to smoke. And then on Raw, they have these cool babyface characters smoking in every segment. Tanda beat Blackman and Guerrero when Albert hit Blackman with a kendo stick to lead to the pin. RTC beat Lita and Hardys when Goodfather pinned Lita after a shoulderbreaker. Richards also superkicked Lita. More soap opera with Triple H and Stephanie, with Stephanie storming off crying. Undertaker beat Benoit when Shane interfered. Kane came in and did the angle choke, slamming Undertaker through the ring. The ring didn't break the first time, so they had to do it again. Taz choked out Crash quickly, and then stole JR's hat and shoved him down. Lawler made the save to a huge pop. Road Dogg and X-Pac beat Rikishi by both pinning him after a spin kick by X-Pac. The main spot was X-Pac laughing while Rikishi gave Dogg the stink face. Jericho beat Venus via DQ when Benoit attacked Jericho for the title-saving DQ. Benoit put Jericho in the STF instead of the crossface. Angle and Triple H were about to go at it in the parking lot when a limo showed up. Both got in. Finally the guy in the limo came out, and it was Vince who scolded both like a parent and told them they had to team. Angle and Triple H and Shane had no finish with Rock and Dudley's. Edge and Christian hit the Dudleys with chairs, taking them out. Angle gave Rock his Olympic slam and Triple H gave him a pedigree. Their music just played and the show ended without them doing a pin. I guess someone couldn't figure out a way out of getting them to do their finishers on Rock, but couldn't get Rock, or the company, to pull the trigger on Rock doing another job, so they just did nothing. Dave Heckner, Earl's twin brother who works as a road agent, underwent an angioplasty to clear up blockages in 3 arteries leading to his heart after suffering a mild heart attack on August 7 at Madison Square Garden. His arteries were in pretty bad shape as he had 90% blockage in one and 70% blockage in 2 others. He was released from the hospital late this past week, but then suffered a staph infection from where his 4 was hooked up and was back in the hospital by the weekend. They were hopeful he'd be out of the hospital by the end of this week. Taping highlights from August 15 in Worcester, Massachusetts. Rock and Wyclef Jean lip-synched It Doesn't Matter as a taping for the Source Hip Hop 2000 Awards, which won't air on WWF TV. For Heat, every report said Angle over Matt Hardy was a fantastic match. Stephanie attacked Lita and Angle used the women's title belt on Matt to set up the win. Stephanie held Angle's hand up after the match. Richards took Stratus to the back before a RTC vs. Tanda match. SmackDown opened with Shane, Stephanie, Triple H and Angle out. Triple H and Angle apologized but kept the tension going. Foley came out and plugged his Christmas book, Geez, It's Only August. Venus beat Guerrero in an IC title match. Chyna at one point power-bombed Venus, but Stratus hit Chyna, breaking a pitcher of water on her head. As Guerrero checked on Chyna, Venus rolled him up. Acolytes and Crash beat Bossman and Kaientai when Bossman walked out on them. Blackman beat Benoit to keep the hardcore title when Jericho hit Benoit with a chair. Edge and Christian beat Devon Dudley and Jeff Hardy. Jeff accidentally hit the Swanton on Devon, who was pinned. This led to a Dudleys vs. Hardys pull-apart. Taz choked out Lawler as he was doing a promo for SummerSlam. Kane choke slammed Dogg and X-Pac, who were wrestling too cool. Undertaker came out and slapped Kane, but Kane laid Undertaker out with chair shots and left him bloody. Foley announced Blackman vs. Shane for hardcore title and Stephanie vs. Lita for women's title on Raw on August 21. Main was non-title with Rock vs. Triple H. Angle hit Rock with a chair, setting up Triple H's clean win with the pedigree, which explains why they didn't do the pinfall the previous night, because I guess they felt Rock getting pinned 2 straight nights was enough. Angle and Triple H celebrated.
After the show ended, Rock did the rock bottom on both guys and the people's elbow on Triple H. SummerSlam had 15,549 tickets sold, less than 700 shy of capacity, for $1,071,590 as of the weekend.
Jericho was in the Bahamas this past week doing a Chef Boyardee commercial.
According to various reports, the PTC marketplace was shut down largely due to wrestling fans' protests against the group. Regarding that angle 18 years ago with Piper, Morocco and Gordon Solie that the Taz Lawler angle was a duplicate of, there is some interesting trivia regarding it, because the match never took place. Right after doing the angle, Morocco was fired and they brought Lawler into Georgia, and he did some of the greatest interviews of the period building up a match with Piper. Well, before that match could take place, Piper also was fired, so all that hype went for naught and Lawler ended up wrestling Tommy Rich. We're told the fact the angle aired 18 years to the date after the original and it was just a week plus after the death of Solie is all purely coincidental, as the people who wrote the angle actually had zero knowledge of that era of wrestling and would not have seen that angle. Brian Gewitz is the name of the writer who deserves a lot of the credit for the scripting of the Triple H Angle Stephanie segments. The hoe who took the table bump on the August 7th Raw from Goodfather is named Lisa Marie Varon.
The other blonde with her who is also full-time is Frosty Moore.
Both are from Ultimate Pro Wrestling in Southern California. Dwayne Johnson and Johnny Lauer, China, are both scheduled to appear at the Democratic Convention. China's book is also due out in January. Brian Keck, who placed 5th nationally in the Olympic trials in Greco-Roman wrestling in the super heavyweight division, 286 pounds, signed a developmental deal and is headed to Ohio Valley. Keck also tried MMA fighting in Brazil and didn't do as well as one would expect from a wrestler of that caliber, losing a tough fight to Pedro Otavio, known in pro wrestling circles for beating Koji Kiao in Japan in a shoot and losing to Keiji Muto on a New Japan show in a work. Keck had a 20-11 record this year, trained in MMA under Mark Coleman, and as an amateur held a win over 1996 Olympic silver medalist Matt Ghaffari. Keck also set a U.S. Olympic trials record, beating Corey Farkas 4-3 in an overtime match to determine 5th place, which went 26-30, the longest match in the history of the Olympic trials. Road Dogg and Test were both injured at the tapings early in the week but back in the ring by the weekend house shows. Test had a slight ankle injury on August 7th, which is why he missed the SmackDown show. Dogg was injured slightly during the taping of the Heat show and couldn't come back out for SmackDown.
WWF registered 10,000 people to vote over the past week.
In a totally embarrassing statement for a reporter from Time magazine, Margaret Carlson on the Capital Gang show on CNN on August 13th, when talking about the Republicans inviting Rock to the convention, called him as white skinhead hateful wrestling guy.
I sympathize with her viewpoint on the hypocrisy of the Republicans, and for that matter the Democrats as well, given the political beliefs of their vice presidential nominee, not in inviting Dwayne Johnson, the actor playing a role based on his scripted giving a woman a rock bottom or hitting someone with a chair,
but in inviting him as a WWF representative and inviting the WWF, as did the Democrats, due to the nature of the product they produce at times, combined with a huge children's audience and how they contradict the beliefs espoused by members of the party as it pertains to children's television. Being that this is politics and there is tons of hypocrisy in looking for votes, I'm not surprised nor alarmed. But that was totally unfair to say about Rock or Dwayne Johnson, and not just the funny part about him being white but calling him a skinhead. She also noted Rock appearing as her outrage of the week, stating the GOP keynoter Wednesday night was the Rock of World Wrestling Federation's awful show SmackDown. The show that celebrates anti-woman, anti-gay, anti-black sentiments with language so coarse and vulgar I can't repeat it here. He loves violence and takes metal chairs, shovels, sledgehammers to his opponents.
The Rock appeals to a growing group of white, working-class youths, and you would think the Republicans would rage against his rage theatrics, like a tent. Don't they still advertise Coca-Cola and MCI, which have withdrawn their advertising?
Instead, they legitimized him. 2000 NCAA heavyweight champion Brock Lesnar became the third former NCAA champion, with Kurt Angle and Sylvester Collector Turkey, to debut under the auspices of the WWF on August 13th at the Ohio Valley Wrestling Show in Louisville before 60 fans.
Lesnar, who had only been in camp less than 2 weeks before being put in the ring, which is awfully fast for someone under Jim Cornette tutelage. Kurt Angle actually debuted under Dory Funk's tutelage after just 1 week of training, and was said to look very good in his debut against BJ Payne.
He had a nice chain of moves into a hip toss, was described as very quick and agile for a guy as big as he is, but at 4 minutes looked noticeably blown up in the ring. He also threw a very high drop kick, sold well, and had lots of presence and charisma in the ring, and using a similar finish as Angle. Lesnar's parents and grandparents were at the show. Lesnar is expected to start appearing on the OVW TV show within the next week or so, which is amazing in and of itself because Cornette usually doesn't allow anyone on TV until they are ready to be put on TV, and the WWF hasn't pressured Cornette to rush anyone, even a much hyped prospect. They also debuted a huge ripped guy called Rage, who was described as very stiff moving in the ring and couldn't work, who teamed with Shelton Benjamin.
That may be David Nelson, a former football player and bodybuilder who has been in the camp for a couple of months and was actually recommended to the WWF by Lee Steinberg, who the movie Jerry Maguire was based on.
Former UFC fighter Ron Waterman, who has also just debuted, using the ring name H20 Man, get it, Waterman, which actually was his UFC nickname as well, against Turkey.
Benoit vs. Jericho will headline an IWA show on September 30th in Puerto Rico. SmackDown on August 8th at the Continental Airlines Arena in East Rutherford, New Jersey drew a sellout 14,182, paying $375,735. House show on August 12th in Detroit at Joe Louis Arena drew 18,368, paying $483,690. About 600 tickets shy of a sellout.
The Split Crew on August 13th, which was also without Rock or Triple H working either show. Rock had the weekend off. Triple H only worked Detroit, did see a noticeable drop in both cities from the usual nearly packed houses as Springfield, Massachusetts drew 4,196, paying $127,700, and New Haven drew 4,936, paying $150,287. Raw on August 14th in Providence drew a sellout 9,932, paying $305,775.
Arena merchandise for the past week totaled $433,059, which was $8.39 per head.
In Detroit, they had Undertaker and Kane over Benoit and Show as the main event. They also did the first Triple H vs. Angle match. I guess it's good they had them work together for a match, no contest ending, before the pay-per-view, but still surprising to have their first singles match on a house show. Probably better on a house show than on TV because at a house show really so few by percentage actually see the thing.
They ran a Split Crew on August 13th.
In Springfield, Massachusetts, with Show out, they used Albert and Angle as the main eventers, losing to Undertaker and Kane. In New Haven, Jericho pinning Benoit was the main event with Saturn over Guerrero as the semi, and they filled out the undercard with matches like Lawler vs. Brooklyn Brawler, Joey Abs vs. Midian, Dupes vs. Mean Street Posse, and Gangrel vs. Joe.
Joe didn't look good and didn't get much heat, although people were high on him after his TV match against Malenko on Heat.
Posse got a lot of heat. Blackman got a huge ovation since it was 3 matches in before they got to see a guy who had been pushed on the main TV shows.
Lawler vs. Brawler had Cat in Lawler's corner and Harvina Harvey Whippleman in drag, in Brawler's corner.
Whether it's the clash of titans in the ring or the drama that unfolds outside it, we're here to break it down, match by match, feud by feud. Remember, in the world of wrestling, every day is a battle, and every victory is a story waiting to be told.
Until next time, keep the passion alive, and never stop wrestling with the possibilities.
This is the Pro Wrestle Machine,